Welcome to Color Correction Transformation Balayage Lived In. These are the supplies we need, and this is the sectioning. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the front, 5, 6, 7 in the back. Now every section I'll be taking is going to be about an inch thick, and I'm going to tease it 3 times, 1, 2, and 3. This is going to diffuse the base color. And I'm also going to be applying my lightener a few inches away and feathering it up to the base. This part is crucial, keeping it angular, diagonal back, for it to look as soft and natural as possible. We always want a very good saturation because the saturation is really key to getting the correct lift. I like to layer my foils. It makes it so much easier to untangle the tease. And I'm going to be going from right to left. So we're doing 2 right, and then we'll go to the left side. If you see how thick and chunky this is, again, I'm doing 3 teases all the way up, just really pushing that hair into the base. Again, laying the foil down, and again, diagonal back. As I'll repeat myself, heavy saturation is key, feathering into the base for a nice natural line. This will help it from looking splotchy at the base. Adding the lightener where it needs and being careful not to overlap too heavily with the pre-lightened hair, light saturation on those ends. We're going to move to the left side. Again, this is about a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch section. And just like the other side, we're going to be teasing all of our foils. We're going to keep this process of application fairly simple. We're going to be going right, left, center, right, left, center in our sectioning pattern. Making it as easy as possible. Have those foils pre-cut so you can grab and go. And this client has very, very thick, long hair. In this color correction, we want to make sure we are as clean as possible during this process. And these foils are back-to-back sections, but they're very large sections. This will help create more brightness and less time than doing tiny micro sections. The difference would be just making sure you have a heavy enough saturation on the hair so you get a good lift. Again, this is a color correction, so I am using 20 volume this entire application, and I'm really working it into the natural hair the most, and I'm being a little more gentle on the previously lightened section. We want to make sure that it stays intact. So this whole process, as you can see, that was done at an angle, and we're doing 2 foils back to back per section, especially in this back zone. Now you'll see there's a triangle, so 2 right, 2 left in a triangle motion, and we will do a heavy weave through the center. This is about an inch thick sectioning with wide weaving. And then again, that doing a good amount of teasing will diffuse the process. Now, this is a section I actually used a balayage board to give me a little bit more security to hold the foils. And as you can see, I'm doing a V shape. So there's going to create a little bit of depth in the center and will have a very natural application when it's done. And again, we're doing 1 more back to back. And this time we're going to be changing up how we paint. We'll keep that weaving pretty consistent throughout this entire application. Now, this back zone here will really pop, especially if she has layers in her hair, to make sure there's not a dark hole right in the center. And I'm doing more of a W shape rather than a V shape, so it comes up a little bit higher, and this will lay on top of that V shape that we did the foil right before it. Lots of product, lots of separation. Her hair is literally down to her waist, so the foils are very long. And you'll see how I left some of that hair out. I painted the hair, but I didn't put it in the foil. That's intentional, so it doesn't lift and break off. It'll just give it a gentle lift. Now we're going back to our V shape from right and left side. Very clean sectioning. Clip that hair out of the way. Again, this is an inch thick, wide weaves, and really good teasing. Again, this is to make a very soft transition from the scalp to the ends in a very soft, organic way, which is why we call it a balayage. Pay close attention to the detailing of that diagonal back of how I apply the product. If I do flat lines, it will look very stripy. So this is just more of a diffused feeling and lays more organically. We are sectioning the hair again, V-shaped section, back to back with the previous foils. These are about almost an inch thick, and I am weaving it so there's a little bit more, not as chunky, a little gentler with a good tease. And when we lay the foil down, if you need the balayage board every time, some parts of the head are easier to use with the balayage board. And sometimes for myself, it's easier not to use the board on every section. Just depends on what part of the head I'm working on and how much stability I need. Having an assistant really does help this process if you've got one that can load up those foils on the board ahead of time. But again, this type of service just takes a lot of patience. So when I go back and forth, I'm just keeping it very consistent on the head from one section to the next to keep it balanced. And I'm trying to be very thoughtful and mindful that the left and the right back quadrants match in terms of how much brightness we're adding. So pay attention to the details. They are important. We don't just want to slop it on. And again, keep that diagonal back application in the foil. That is very necessary to create a beautiful lived-in look without any harsh lines or parts that show up where they shouldn't and look not natural, but a little bit blotchy. We also don't want stripy hair. Now that we come back to the center, we take this triangular section because it's in the middle, so right, left, middle. This would be a brick lay pattern. Make sure to tease just like every other section. Again, her hair is so long. It was such a treat to be able to do this application on this wonderful client. Now, the back side of the head is one part to pay attention to. And as we move into the front of the head, we will change up our application process just a little bit. But as you can see here, there's a V shape happening. This is going to create boldness, but it won't have like a stripy line on the top. It'll kind of diffuse from the left and the right side and marry it together with a little bit of depth in the crown. And because we are doing back-to-back foiling here, the foil we add on top of this regardless of how you like to foil, think of it as layering the brightness together. So again, taking these wide sections really makes this application faster. You just have to have a very good application of lightener in the foil and really work it into the hair. So I'm using the balayage board to hold that down. And on this section, again, I did a little bit finer of a weave compared to the really heavy in the previous sections, but I'm gently feathering it up into a W shape to kind of give it a little bit more depth in the center of bright depth with the darkness underneath it. And this will just look very natural because everything that we're leaving out and not putting into the foil, we are going to tone that down in between the foils in a separate process once all of the foils are in the head. I'm using, they're probably about 12 to 16-inch foils. I hand tore these to get them exactly the length that I wanted. Now that we're moving into the front of the head, we're doing diagonal back. And I'm just kind of see how much hair, that's about an inch wide section, taking it pretty thick and doing the tease to soften up the base. And in the very front, I like to apply the lightener a little closer to the scalp than in the back. It just looks a little bit more natural. And again, that diagonal back feeling, so the brightness is coming from the front and there's a little bit more depth behind that bright color. As you can see, it's another inch wide section here and really heavy on that weave with the tease, keeping it consistent. Sometimes if you use a balayage board that has the teeth, it can push those little hairs out of the way. So you have a cleaner place to work. And as y'all know, if you're teasing the hair, it can get pretty messy. So keep a lot of clips around, keep extra towels if you need to, because it can kind of really overwhelm you if you aren't setting up your tray properly before you start. So even though this person has a lot of hair, I am still able to make its application as fast and smooth as possible because when I pre-sectioned it out, I thought about all of the transitions on the head so that when I go to apply it, I have my whole plan ready to go and it just makes the application very quick. And again, I don't like to use a lot of straight lines. I like to tease the hair. I like to feather the lightener up into the base and using things like V shapes and W's create a natural looking highlight. And because I want to keep the right and the left side very consistent, I like to go in right away, do one side, do the other. I do hop back and forth, but this is so I can keep it pretty consistent between how much brightness I'm adding in to my client and the consistency. If you are one that is very slow, use a low volume. The higher the volume, the faster it will lighten the hair. So if you work quite slow, start with a lower volume. And as you mix more lightener throughout your process, slowly increase the developer to a higher developer. That way, when you are finished, it will develop faster at the end and it will match up the beginning with that lower developer. So you don't have to wash all of this out in too many steps. But if you're really slow and the back is finished and the front is still just getting going, take a pause, rinse the back foils as needed. Make sure the lightener does not oversit and ruin the hair. If it looks white, it is time to rinse. Again, feathering this up into the base really helps create a gentle line of demarcation. Now, this is on a quicker process doing the editing of this video. So it looks a lot faster than it really is, but this entire application took me 1 hour and 40 minutes from beginning to end. So make sure you book enough time if you're working on clients, and if you are practicing at home using a doll head, think about the beginning to end, time yourself so you know what time you started. So again, if those back foils are completed because they've lifted to the desired color, you want to rinse those out. I'm always thinking about the health of the hair when I apply my products. And the heavier the saturation, the more the lift. So if the hair again is already on the lighter side, just very gently lay the product down so you don't get it too over processed, which means time for a haircut, if you know what I mean. So now there's 2 quadrants left, the right and the left side. I'm just checking for the balance, and I'm kind of mapping out the next approach. When we're working on the front, I like to take a pretty fine weave on the first hairline and a gentle tease. But again, I want it to be slightly brighter in the front. So I am going to apply my product slightly closer to the base than I did in the back. I'm also going to be taking slightly finer sections in the front, and I'm not going to be taking those inch wide sections like I did in the back. This, I'm going to make sure I very much fine tune the look I'm going for in my application. And so these are going to be slightly closer together. And I'm going to alternate between a thick weave and a fine weave to create dimension. The thicker the weave, the more bold those light pieces will be. And in this section right here, you can see how fine that weave is. And I'm going to be quite a bit closer to the scalp here, feathering it in, still leaving a little bit of depth, but I did these right back to back for a slightly bolder money piece in the front. And I'm going to weave the entire front to back section, being very mindful of where that hair lives and how much depth I'm giving it. So we want darkness to create depth. It makes the light pieces even brighter. So in something like a very lived in color like this, we want to make sure that we have as much darkness as lightness to bounce off of each other. So she can let her hair go for another year before coloring it, and it'll look still very natural and organic. Now, we always think about we wear a ponytail, we're in the sun. We always know the sides and the top and the front will always be naturally the lightest because the sun always lightens up our hair organically. So when we are creating this in a hand-painted way, we're going to put more brightness in the front, the top, and the sides. So we're going to be slightly more meticulous in this entire application process. Again, specialized color is a skill that if you understand where you want boldness and brightness, you can create it rather than just putting the foils in the hair and hoping it turns out well. I love to do everything with intention. It just makes me feel really good knowing that what I'm giving my client is exactly what she's asking for, and the results are usually spot on and stunning. As you can see, these are some very bold pieces, and these are just going to be a couple extra wider pieces that pop as it's diffused with those finer weaves that we did in the other foils. I love doing the combination. And again, when you tease the base of this, it diffuses from the top so it looks very soft and natural. When we are applying our foils, we want to think about the distance between one foil to the next. So in this section here, it's a very bold piece, and I teased it about 3 good tight ones, and I'm using the balayage board to help push down the loose hair and give me a clean application with the board with that control. And again, from the top of the head, sometimes I like to do a diagonal back from the front so it's brighter from the top and gets a little bit darker underneath to avoid any harsh lines. When doing this application process, I have all the tools I need ready to go next to me just to make it quicker and smoother. And see, I'm alternating again between a finer weave and the really bold pieces to create softness in between. And it just gives it a really nice look in the end with some lighter pieces that pop a little bit more than the others and create a lot of dimension. I'm always being cautious of my client and aware the foils are kind of where I'm laying them, push them off the face, give myself a nice pattern here to work with. As we move into the other side, you're going to see how close I am working on the front hairline, fine weaving, and a slight tease at the base. And again, as these are the front few pieces, I'm going to put the lightener quite a bit closer to the scalp compared to the back where we left quite a bit of space between the scalp and the line of lightener that we used to create more depth and lived in feeling. Again, this is back to back, fine weaving, right in that front hairline. This is going to create a little bit of a pop in the front of her face. And in the back, it will be more lived in the back. I changed my foils up in the very front so I don't have to work with such big foils on the hairline because she has a much shorter fringe area, so I don't need to use those giant foils like I did everywhere else. This is what's fun about customizing your application process. As you can see, it's a diagonal back shape. It's not flat layers across the top of the head. Maintaining, again, every section, teasing it. It's going to create a little bit more of a lived-in feeling in the front. And it's going to make those front couple of foils much brighter. I'm always thinking about my application and feathering up right towards the top of the foil to make sure it's a very soft look in that transition. We will continue the foiling process as we move across this last quadrant. And again, we're working in, we're doing a color correction here. So we have to think about the pre-lightened hair, the damage. Are you adding any additives to help create more health in the lifting process? I'm always thinking about all the details of the specific head of hair I'm working on. And making this process just as smooth as possible. Whenever working on extra long hair, we have to mentally prepare ourselves for the amount of work it's going to take per section compared to somebody with much shorter hair and how delicate we want to work, and knowing that the hair that's very long is more fragile and taking that into consideration along the way. Now, as we are rounding this corner of the top section here, I'm starting to think about my placement from the left side and the right side, making sure it's fairly balanced, keeping my rotation of every other foil being a little heavier of a weave and that thicker, bolder pieces, and the finer weave in between. This is going to create dimension, brightness, and blending. As we get to the back section of the top, we're going to kind of change up how I approach that last triangle, because as we do the diagonal back, we are going to have a triangular section last, and that is how we're going to end it. Looks like we have one more foil until that last section comes into play here. Now we always are thinking about when we're lightening, what we're going to be toning with in the end. There's a lot of different chemistry in this process. Does your client want to be a lighter color, warmer, brighter, cooler? Or if you want them to be a fashion color, you can go in and put something more fun on top of this. Of course, that wouldn't be as lived in, but it's pretty fun to have the light hair to play with. I like to pull the hair straight up when I'm teasing the top section. It just makes it so much easier when you need to detangle in the end. Okay, so here's the top section. I'm taking a giant weave, I'm cutting that entire piece, and again, teasing it down. This is going to overlay that entire crown. So if the hair naturally splits apart because of the head shape, the parting section, this is going to create brightness, but it's not going to have any lines at the root.